Got my G.I. Joes, Joe.
In a world of heroes and villains at war, G.I. Joe fights for freedom forevermore. Cobra commanders reign of defeat. His subordinates plot a plan complete. Arise, Serpentor, arise, a leader forged from the world's worst guys. Dr. Mindbenders, dream of might. Cobra's new champion, a civil war, hill in sight.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Anything Joe's, a collaborative journey through the world of G.I. Joe. My name is Greg Engel.
And I'm Jaren Decker.
And we'll be your host today. Today on Anything Joe's, it's Cobra Convergence 8, where we celebrate all things Cobra. I had mentioned in a previous episode that I thought it would be a nice refresher to come off of Arise, Serpentor, Arise, which we just wrapped up, and we're getting ready to go into the G.I. Joe movie, which Jaren has never seen. I thought it would be nice to talk a little bit about the various origins of Serpentor, easily the only other person to really have a claim to the Cobra throne on an extended run. He actually has some legitimacy, because that's kind of like his whole calling. So I wanted Jaren to have a better understanding of Serpentor's origin in other continuities, and I also wanted to make fun of how many DNAs they've used in the cartoon. This research was not as easy as I expected. I really just expected to pull up a list somewhere and just be like, here they are. But when I got into it, it was a little bit more elusive than I expected. So let's start with the primary origins of Serpentor, which is, of course, the cartoon and the comic. We'll start with the cartoon first, because that's what is the freshest in our mind, and the Arise, Serpentor, Arise miniseries. Both in the cartoon and the comic book, Serpentor has not been billed as a leader. Dr. Mindbender is pitched a super soldier of sorts, we're going to make a series of clones and they're all going to be the best fighters ever. And this is part of the reason why Cobra Commander doesn't object to it initially. In the comic book, he actually encourages him a little bit. He gives him access to Dr. Venom's brainwave scanner, which is useful in Serpentor's creation in the comic. And he's kind of he doesn't think he's going to be able to do it, basically. And in both of these instances, he is successful. And when you are using specifically the DNA of the greatest leaders of their time, it's a big surprise. You made a leader out of him. And so that's where the turmoil from both of these stories. So in both of these origins, Serpentor is intended to be a great soldier, but for resource management, also, they aren't able to duplicate him multiple times. So let's talk about the DNA that's required to make Serpentor.
It's crazy that the DNA of all the great leaders of the world aren't fine with being second and third and fourth in command. Crazy.
Yeah, it's weird that you didn't actually pick the people that are the strongest. You picked tactical masterminds, and you picked a whole heck of a lot of them.
Can you imagine if he went through and he was like, hey, we're going to get the DNA from Genghis Khan's left-hand man because he's a good fighter. And
right?
We're going to get Shaka Zulu's head lieutenant because he was really a good fighter.
We can't find a lot of probably the DNA of the best warriors of time. We got ground to dust where they eventually fell or something, I would imagine. Compiling the DNA that was used for Serpentor in the cartoon was very challenging. Because if you watch those episodes, you know that they are very haphazard about throwing out the names. We'd watch them grab a bunch of DNA, and then in the final thing, they reveal that, there's a bunch of other ones that we didn't even know about. And they're essentially unnamed. I was able to track that down with two resources. The first one was, there's a Serpentor-heavy episode, I think it's called My Favorite Things. And in this episode, Serpentor is reliving past memories, which is an ability that is only briefly touched on in both the cartoon and the comic. That Serpentor has a bit of I wouldn't exactly call it total recall, but he has very specific memories from very specific people that he can pull back at times. In the episode that I'm referring to, he actually would take on the appearance of that person. They have their facial hair, his facial structure changes. It's only brought up in this episode, so I don't know how much stock you can put into it.
That's
but it
pretty
did confirm. It did confirm 2 characters that weren't mentioned in Arise Serpentor Arise that were mentioned in the field manual, which is what I had tracked back in the earlier episodes to find kind of like a source of all the names. So, from the field manual and gathered from the cartoons, these are all basically confirmed DNAs that were used to make Serpentor. Alexander the Great, Attila the Hun, Eric the Red, Genghis Khan, Geronimo, Rasputin, Hannibal, Henry VIII, Ivan the Terrible, Julius Caesar, Montezuma, Napoleon, Philip II, King Takshaka, Ulrich the Batterer, Vlad the Impaler, William the Conqueror, Xanath Amontoth, and Xerxes the First. That's all in text. I don't know if there were intended to be any more. I actually looked for a script for Arise Serpentor Arise to find if I was any more hidden detail. Couldn't find anything. So as far as I know, this is the complete list of all the DNA that was used in the cartoon. It's a stark contrast to the comic book origin, which very specifically says 10. There are 10 exactly. And Larry doesn't even take the time to name all 10 of them. Before I get into that, though, let me finish out the origin of the Serpentor in the cartoon. They've assembled all this DNA. They put it on a lab. I don't really know what the source of Serpentor was before he turns into the monster that he's made. They never really show it. He's like underneath a towel or something. So we assume it's some baseline genetic material. In the comic book, we very clearly see it's like, they call it a simulacrum. It's basically like a human body with no face. He's made all the genetic stuff somehow. Pretty advanced technology for any doctor. But we see that his building blocks are a little bit more like human in form. In the cartoon, we don't get to see that. The first thing we see is a giant meatball monster, which we've talked at great length about because it's such a funny and weird thing. And big surprise, that's not in the comic because it's so ludicrous. Yeah, so Cobra Commander sabotages it initially. We get a weird monster. It backfires. They have a do-over. They have enough left to just go at it again, basically. And this time they successfully make the Serpentor that we know of the cartoon. The Serpentor that in the cartoon exclusively says,
This I command!
In this one, is that when they get the DNA of Sarge? Or do we touch on that?
Yes. Yes, Sarge fills in for the damaged DNA of Sun Tzu. And in the cartoon, it's pretty explicitly said that the reason Serpentor is so brash and impulsive is because he doesn't have the patience of Sun Tzu.
Okay.
When we look at the file card for Serpentor, we'll see that that's another recurring trait. That Mindbender is trying to pull very specific characteristics from these people. Not just, here's a bunch of great military dudes. He's like, we're looking for the brilliant tactician part of of this person and the fiscal management of this character. So it is a recurring theme. It's not exclusive to the cartoon. And yes, they have to use Sarge's DNA to kind of fill in the gaps, which makes him, I would think, stronger somehow. I know that doesn't quite check out, but I think that's supposed to be the vibe of it.
Sarge gets to be like the frog from Jurassic Park, where you need a little bit of DNA, you just stick some frog DNA. Need a little
Sergeant DNA. And Sarge is not the only Joe or non-historical figure that has to lend his DNA to the creation of Serpentor. Let's flip over to the comic book origin, where you have to dig even deeper to find the secrets of Serpentor. The comic book origin of Serpentor starts off in essentially the same way. Dr. Mindbender has an idea for a great trooper, and to do it, he's going to pull the DNA of 10 great leaders over time. Cobra Commander greenlights this for a similar reason. One, he doesn't think he can do it. And two, a super trooper would be, a valuable asset to Cobra that he could control. Well, same logic. It doesn't really work out like that, because when the 10 bodies are assembled and he pulls together, Serpentor is almost immediately and impulsively driven to lead. So from the comic, I pulled the names of every leader that Larry named, and big surprise, there's basically only one name, and it's Genghis Khan, which is ironic because in this current Skybound G.I. Joe book, Serpentor has taken on specifically just that DNA to be called Serpentor Khan now. So it makes sense that would have been the one name that Larry pulled from. However, there are some references that help you fill in the blanks a little bit, and I'm primarily pulling from one specific source. I'm pulling from G.I. Joe number 50, which is basically where Serpentor comes to life. But it's not Serpentor that gives us this hint. It's the 11th piece of DNA. And that 11th piece of DNA is Storm Shadow.
Huh.
Now, Jaren, we're about 2 years behind where this event is happening. And
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, we're just going to have to live in spoiler territory. And I'll save some surprises for you along the way. But essentially, we've reached. Sorry, there's nothing to cover otherwise.
I'm going to close my ears for the rest of the episode.
But essentially, we've reached the part of the story where Storm Shadow is transitioning from being a villain into a hero. He has been in the employ of Cobra to find out who assassinated his master, his sensei, and he teams up with Snake Eyes at the very end of the previous 2 issues to get these answers, and it results in him getting gunned down on the beach by the Baroness, dead. Mindbender, literally the book right before this arc starts, says, "Well, it's a shame to let good material go to waste," and they take Storm Shadow's body with them. After we've assembled the 10 DNA, which is the exact opposite of the cartoon, it takes place in about 4 pages. Issue 49 opens up with Destro and Mindbender robbing an unnamed tomb. He just gives a specific location, so I was not able to suss out who they were actually after. And then they're back, and it's being made. 1 issue later, he's here. Storm Shadow's DNA is used to kind of fill in some of the gaps, and is actually kind of a good way of saying, hey, this would explain how Serpentor would know some modern stuff, which is something that I kind of ribbed on them for in the cartoon, because he wouldn't know what robots were, but he would totally understand location and placement. In addition to that, because they're using the brainwave scanner, Dr. Mindbender plugs himself into the brainwave scanner to also fill in some of those gaps, and in addition to that, would imprint a sense of loyalty to Cobra on top of Serpentor's, muddied brain, which is very smart, makes total sense. As a side effect of this experimentation, Storm Shadow is revived and is not touched on hardly, other than in this moment, is never referenced again to my knowledge. But Storm Shadow has got visions of all of the same stuff that Serpentor would have in his mind. And in this one page, and in this one reference, he speaks about many famous battles that had happened over time. And with Jaren's help, I was able to piece together a partial list of who these names were referencing. So, of the 10 names that they say that they're pulled, I can confirm that Comic Book Serpentor definitely has Genghis Khan, Hannibal, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Xerxes I, and William the Conqueror as part of his makeup. And those are all names that he shares with the cartoon. So it makes sense that there's a basis of what they wanted to start with. And either Larry said, that's too many, I'm going to comb it down, or maybe they gave them a list and they were just like a shopping list. Pick the names that you want to use, and some of them made the cut and some of them didn't. I'm still pretty unclear on how all these names got picked out and who chose who. And if you have any intel on who these last 4 people are that are not specifically named, maybe there's a much, much later reference that I'm missing. I'd really like to know, just for the sake of posterity, who he's supposed to be born from. So, Comic Book Serpentor is not like Cartoon Serpentor. Cartoon Serpentor is very brash. He's kind of crappy, even to the people that are loyal to him. And he's so impulsive, he makes very bad tactical decisions. I said this before, but over the length of season 2 of the G.I. Joe animated series, you start to get a vibe that the troops are getting tired of Serpentor, and they feel like maybe this was not the right decision. And that culminates by the time we make it to the movie, where things reach a peak. And then directly following the movie, we kind of see a reversal where Cobra Commander is trying to make a play to come back. In the comic book, Serpentor is extremely competent right from the get-go. Doesn't know anything about what's going on in this conflict. Immediately picks up a weapon, joins other Cobra soldiers to lead the charge. Gives them a rousing speech that's drawn from his memories and is one of my favorite Serpentor moments of all time. There's another great moment that I didn't have to research because it lives rent free in my head, where Serpentor jumps into battle with the Cobra troopers, gets shot immediately in the arm. The troopers are like, "Oh no, he's been hurt already." Serpentor picks up his knife, his little dagger, puts heat on it, cauterizes the wound, bandages it up, gets back into it. Is
Heck yeah.
a really good leader. Like, genuinely, the tactical aspect of it is so solid in the comic book. Leads an assault so other Cobra troopers like Destro and Baroness can retreat to safety. Like, is a very good tactical commander. Is not like how we see Cobra Commander at all. Is not afraid of anything. Is very charismatic. Is just very, very cool. Serpentor, comic book Serpentor is top notch. Comic book Serpentor has a pretty decent little reign in the book, and for the most part is, it's business as usual. He does a pretty good job, but the Joes are doing their stuff, whatever. Until someone that who is in the how do I phrase this? Someone that is in a Cobra Commander suit, but may or may not be the actual Cobra Commander, returns to Cobra Island, and it sparks a Cobra civil war where they have a huge conflict on Cobra Island. People that are loyal to Serpentor, people that are loyal to Cobra Commander, and they're all duking it out. And with some clever government negotiation, the G.I. Joe team is forced to get involved to get back a piece of military tech that Cobra had stolen from them in the first place. And so it's one of the best G.I. Joe reads of all time. It got everything in it. There's like double crossing, there's battles going left and right, there's subterfuge, it's got something for everybody. Has one of the most iconic covers of all time, and it's of course the cover where Serpentor is driving a his tank, and he's got the Baroness strapped to the front as a human shield. It's great. If you haven't read it, you must read it immediately. It rules. And it's also, unfortunately, the end of Serpentor in the Marvel run, as Zartan takes a 1 in a million arrow, well, I guess 2 in 1 million, because it's not the first time we've seen a shot like this, fires it up into the air, and has such a strong trajectory, and has such a good aim, I guess, that he strikes Serpentor down. It gets him right in the eye. And that's it. They put him on ice, and they bury him in the freighter, and he's gone for the rest of the Marvel run. It's not completely the end of Serpentor, as we, in between Larry coming back for 155, we have a alternate reality. And I'm not going to dive too much into the other realities of Serpentor, but I can dive into it a little bit. When Image and Devils do picks up the G.I. Joe licensing, this is after 155. They are, at that time, were picking up the continuity. It would later be retconned when Larry picks it back up and decided he didn't want to have anything to do with it. But in this continuity, there's a organization of the dedicated Serpentor disciples, I guess, and they call themselves the Coil. The Coil is first mentioned in the animated series as I don't even remember their loyalty, but it's grown into a very specific subset of people that are loyal to Serpentor and Serpentor only. And in the Devil's Due run, these people have got the body of Serpentor out of the buried freighter and somehow managed to reanimate it. And there's also a bunch of children running around that are clones of Serpentor that have not been aged up. They're just aging at regular time. They're 6 or 7 years old. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they're around 10. Much like Boba Fett, Jango Fett. He's the one clone that gets to grow up in the normal way. So, this Serpentor comes back, has a new suit, has a bunch of people, the Coil has a bunch of people that are loyal to him. They strike back to take over Cobra. Same old story. He takes over for a little bit. There's another big war, but Cobra Commander is able to defeat him at the end. Here we are, back to the basics. In the IDW run, which is, in the continuity that we're in right now, there's a returning, I think this is right, they make another clone. I don't think it's the same body. And this Serpentor is made and controlled by the upper level government, the kind of gray area government that does stuff doesn't always check out with on the moral scale. And I think they want to use him to. I'm sorry. This is the part I didn't research very well. They want to weaponize him, but the only thing you need to know is that it fails again, and except this time they kill Snake Eyes.
Oh dang!
Yeah, this is where Snake Eyes dies. He sacrifices himself. He throws himself on a grenade. They both go over the side. It blows up. Basically the end. Or is it? It's not, because in the Skybound run currently, they definitely made a new clone. I know this for a fact, and they specifically only use the DNA of Genghis Khan, and it makes Serpentor a little bit more vicious, and also he gets a sweet beard, which we all needed in our Serpentor. And that's where we're at now. It's actually kind of wild to think that we're in a time where Serpentor is still a living, breathing antagonist in our current comic, which I love.
Being written by Larry.
Yeah.
Another crazy.
Who is notorious for not being a big fan of stuff like this. Larry, there used to be a long-running thing where Larry had said, when Globulus came out and the Cobra Law stuff, he was like, okay, this is the line. I'm not writing about this. And it's funny because I can understand why that's the line, but you can also tell that Larry, I don't think particularly enjoyed Serpentor. It was a little too sci-fi for him. And as a result, Serpentor is never around for very long. That run in Marvel that's probably a 2-year window, maybe less because the books were coming out more regularly because it was so successful. Mm-hmm. He's never had a position of power that he can hold for any amount of time, which is how I have always used Serpentor. That he's like not really part of Cobra. He's got his own thing, and it gets complicated. There are enough Cobra operatives now that the coil could consist of characters that most people don't use on a regular basis, that you don't particularly feel are super loyal to Cobra, and they have their own thing. But, whatever, different strokes for different folks. Those are kind of the baseline ones. But Serpentor has shown up in other continuities and with a much more creative spin to his origin. In the IDW run, and I am talking about the reboot IDW run, not the A Real American Hero Larry run, Serpentor is not even a character that is vying for power. He is a literal cult leader, and they worship a god that's like, it's not Globulus, but he has like a Globulus-style name, and is never shown, I don't think, in this. And the charismatic part of his personality is really what's on display here, because he is shown helping multiple people that are competing for the title of Cobra Commander discreetly, with the sole obligation that he doesn't care who gets it. He helps them all, then whoever does get it will owe him, which is kind of brilliant. He's very level-headed, he's very calm, and he's very conniving. He implants ideas without people knowing it, and it's really well written. That whole IDW reboot is a really good read if you're looking for some alternate takes on classic Joe and Cobra characters. And in the G.I. Joe Renegades cartoon, he's just a dang old snake. Cobra Commander has a gigantic, and I do mean a gigantic snake, like Snake Eyes Origins movie big, that would eat people entirely, and seemingly could understand what Cobra Commander was saying. He was a gift, I think, from Mindbender, and his name is Serpentor. I don't think we'll never know because Renegades didn't get to explore that at all. But it could have just been a weird coincidence that he, or just a funny nod. But here it is. I researched it, so I'm making sure that we're aware of it.
It's crazy because we live in a world now where we might get to see a whole new incarnation of Serpentor. We get to see we could, with the new Skybound, its own series, we could see a new take on Serpentor from a new creative team, which would be cool.
Yeah, and I'm excluding a couple of things like there's a lot of G.I. Joe Transformers crossovers. Like there's a Transformer called Serpentor, and he looks like Serpentor. He transforms into something that's a little out of my wheelhouse, frankly. And he's technically is like a Decepticon thing, and I'm like, that's not close enough to make the Cobra Convergence cut. The last piece of the origin I want to talk about before we talk about the toys is the file card, because for a lot of us, the file card was the first piece of information we used to build the character that we were playing with. And here's the file card, verbatim.
A secret cabal of Cobra scientists, under the direction of the Interrogator and Destro, combed the tombs, sarcophagi, and relics of the great despots of history to find cells with DNA traces. From these long-dead genetic blueprints, they produced a composite clone with the military genius of Napoleon, the ruthlessness of Julius Caesar, the daring of Hannibal, and the fiscal acumen of Attila the Hun, the ultimate Cobra Emperor. A master of political intrigue and a brilliant tactician, he's capable of wresting power from Cobra Commander for the benefit of the Interrogator and Destro. Fortunately for the Joes, the Cobra Emperor's own ambitions were not taken into consideration by his creators.
So the file card doesn't say anything about Super Trooper stuff. They're literally like, they made a new emperor, and you got to buy it because he's taking over. This was a pretty classic strategy with toys of this time, is they were like, how are we going to get kids to keep buying toys? And it was like, well, we'll phase out some of the old ones. We see this, in various forms of their media, and I think that's what this was. It was basically like, here's a character so important you have to buy him, and hey, it's a prerequisite that you also buy his vehicle so we can make him more expensive. We won't discuss the air chariot in this episode for reasons of length exclusively, but the air chariot is basically always accompanied Serpentor in most versions of it. It is kind of a defining characteristic of him, and it rules. Like, I don't need to go into it. If you don't like the air chariot, get with it. It's super cool. It's probably the best. It's probably the best single person vehicle that I've ever seen. Like, it's maybe the most iconic. Destro's little despoiler thing comes to mind, but it's really is the one thing I can think of that goes hand in hand with Serpentor, because it's kind of like a portable throne, right? The evolution of it is like, it really does give him that regality that Cobra Commander doesn't have. Much like, there's not, early Cobra Commander figures didn't have a cape, and that's another thing that I think is a great throwback to kind of his history and his his presence. I think all that stuff kind of just like ratcheted up what a great leader he was like striving to be. But yeah, the file card only throws up a couple of names, and it also reinforces the concept that we don't want everything about Hannibal. We just want his daring. They don't go into like how that would work out. You can't just like go into the computer and be like, isolate all the like real creepy stuff from this one. Just get his fiscal acumen. This is actually referenced in one of the IDW comics, and the later run, I can't remember what they call it, but the concept is that Serpentor can pull the abilities of these people like when he needs them. So if he needs to be a better fighter, he'll pull that ability forward. This is another ability of Serpentor's that was not really drawn on in the past, and I can't think of an instance where it's referenced prior to this IDW run, unless you count the the cartoon episode where he's like changing his appearance and everything. But that seems to be memory based. So again, there's a lot of gray area. I mean, in every format, there's some stuff where you're like, I'm not really sure how this works, and it's not been spelled out at all. So you have to kind of cohesively build your own Serpentor from these ideas. What can he do and what can't he do? Which one of these names was applicable and which one wasn't?
I like the idea that, like, come tax time, he's like, I need to get the tax ability, the Excel ability of
right.
Becky from HR. Like, let's call upon that DNA. Like,
who's the Cobra accountant around here? Tax Viper, you're fired. I've got this, buddy. Where's my what's that thing called? The Acubus, the like little beads that they would move left and right. Well, they have this thing called a calculator. Storm Shadow's never heard of a calculator. Get out of here. So that's the many different origins and histories of Serpentor as I can see it. If you have interesting information about Serpentor that we've excluded, please leave us a comment or write us an email. I'd love to hear. Anytime I start diving into this stuff, I'm always kind of amazed at how much stuff is like kind of left on the floor for us to fill in with our imaginations. If you have any insight into this at all, I'd be very, very interested in talking about it.
Also, if you have if we're talking about it and you're like, man, I really wish that I had watched the Rise Serpentor Rise 5-part miniseries, and you haven't done that, just go back like a couple videos. We did all 5 of them in 5 different parts, and
Yeah.
I'm normally pretty humble, but they are probably some of the most fun things we've ever done on the channel. It's been a blast.
Yes, I absolutely agree. You can watch all 5 parts. That whole episode's there with our commentary. Your results may vary, but there's some pretty funny parts in it. It's especially been fun to rewatch it with Jaren because we're seeing things that I've never in my entire life. I've watched these dozens of times. I'm seeing stuff I've never seen before, where there's a lot of really great talking points, just like this. I tend to be a big picture G.I. Joe guy because I'm trying to remember so much stuff. So doing a deep dive like this, where I'm like, look at all these little things that kind of nobody's talking about, is great fun for me. There's only one other thing. You talk about the show all you want. You can talk about every appearance he's ever been in. But until you talk about the toys, you don't really know anything about Serpentor. So let's take a look at the many versions of Serpentor we've had over the years.
It's time for action figure analysis.
There have only been 7 Serpentor figures ever in the history of all the lines, at least that I could find. And between the 2 of us, we own every one of them except for 1. So we're going to talk about them one by one. And obviously, if we're going to start with one, we're going to start with the OG.
Heck yeah.
I love this figure so much. So this is the original Serpentor. And if you're not a vintage person or you're not really familiar with it, he has this removable cape, which for its time, dude, so good. It's like that shiny, sparkly stuff. I remember being a huge fan of this. This cape actually might be a repro. You guys know how I am about replacing stuff. And then he came with a little dagger, and whoops. He's okay. He's tough. He's got Sarge DNA in him.
Yeah, that's the comic book version of Serpentor. That's not the cartoon one.
He has this little hood is removable. It like plugs in like a backpack would, which I thought was a very clever idea. It made the figure, like this figure really stands out among other vintage figures. Not only just the helmet, but the hood, the cape. He had a lot of stuff going on that like the other figures at this time didn't. And this is, arguably one of the best years for figures. And I think he's a big part of that. Everything design-wise about I'm going to pull him again. Everything about this figure design-wise rules, dude. The armor, the snakes, the colors, like it's the perfect everything. Easily one of my favorite vintage figures of all time. I know you're not really doing vintage anymore, Jaren, but do you have any thoughts on the original Serpentor?
Figures like the original Serpentor are the ones that like it makes me kind of want to get them. Like there are a few like that. I'm like those are the ones that like I will like have and maybe keep forever. Like I have this Steel Brigade that I have on my desk. Like there's a few of like the vintage figures and I'm like they're just so like classic, so important maybe I guess to the line, to the series, or it's me talking, just weird enough and unique enough to where I'm like I kind of want it.
I think we all have that, like you see something in a toy line you don't collect really, and you're like I have a Bo-Katan, right? You guys know I'm not really a Star Wars person anymore, but I saw it and was like, oh, so what a cool figure. And so randomly, yes, you see something, you just like, I gotta have it, and you pick something up. And I get it, right? He really does, like, he's one of the most amazing figures, maybe one of the best figures of that year, which is really saying a lot because that year is so strong. The second version of Serpentor came out in 2002, and it's the only one I don't have because it was a reissue of that Serpentor. It was only sold online to online retailers, and at that time, it was not as exciting for me as some of the other stuff that was coming out. But that figure, which I'll find a picture of, is basically the exact same thing, except that they've changed the gold to black, which is maybe, I don't know. It looks cool, but not as cool as the gold looks, I don't think. And his cape is also black. It's not great. There's a reason I skipped it, and it's because I feel like it's a step backwards from the original. But it's fine. it's an incredibly valuable figure now because it was such a short, packed, limited wave. So I forgot to mention that version 1 Serpentor does have one variant. It's nothing major, but he has a yellow neck, and it's significantly more valuable as a result, and I don't have that either. I actually think I would rather have that yellow neck Serpentor than this actual missing piece of my collection. So this just doesn't do much for me. It looks good, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know what I mean?
I think he looks cool. I think the 2002 version of Serpentor is awesome. And now I kind of want it because I just had to pull up a picture because I don't remember what it looks like because I've never seen it before.
Good luck, because it is. I have looked at it before, and it's just the cost to enjoyment ratio is just not there for me. Like, I can't. I would only use it. I can't even do that. Like, the whole idea would be I get this Serpentor, and I won't have to worry about like damaging or breaking my existing Serpentor. But this one is so valuable, I would have the same level of guilt.
$290 on eBay. That's the cheapest.
Yeah. Is that an unopened one?
That's an unopened one. But I don't see any opened ones.
That stuff was, that stuff just went crazy overnight. I have a short but kind of entertaining story about this Serpentor. This Serpentor is not my childhood Serpentor. When I was in my, we'll say early 20s, it's a little gray when you reach a certain age, I was working at a grocery store overnight as a stock boy, and this is what you guys are seeing is what I'm like all the time. It's only with maturity that I realized to stop talking about G.I. Joe at people that don't care about it. But I used to be real bad about it. And so I had convinced these guys, these are 20-year-old dudes, to come play G.I. Joes at my house. And they came over. I had set up this whole like play scheme, and it was a great time. I mean, we had a blast. It's a real nostalgia. You were just connecting with our childhood vibes, basically. It's no different than what we're trying to do right now. I mean, in a very real way, this is how I play with G.I. Joes now.
Yeah.
Anyway, my buddy is playing. He's got Serpentor. We would change positions. Like, I would be like, all right, this is what's going on over here. You take over. I'm going to go over here, and I'll take over this guy's stuff. That's just how I played it for a long time, because I thought it would challenge your imagination to be put in an unpredictable moment and have to adapt to it. Anyway, my buddy goes and gets my Serpentor, and he's like, this I command, and his arm completely breaks off. I've never seen a figure break this way. He broke like at the bicep. It was pretty brutal, and I just remember, actually it's kind of funny because we were having such a good time. I remember just being like, don't even sweat it, dude. And I went on eBay, which at that time was probably still in its infancy or younger, and it was just like, hey, Serpentor, there's one. It was $20, I think, gimme. And that's where this Serpentor came from. I can't remember how old I was when I was playing this, but I can tell you almost exactly a story with every vintage figure I have. I remember so much with such clarity wherever these figures come from. It's crazy. Anyway, that's my short broken arm Serpentor replaced Serpentor's figure. Let's move on to 2005, where they did take some steps to make a better figure. In 2005, G.I. Joe was still in an O-ring form. They were putting them out in like 3-packs that came with a comic, and the figures were tried to be connected to whatever comic it came with. And so we got a lot of the OG-13, which I've talked about in earlier comic book issues. They were putting like really much more comic accurate figures out. And so when they got to Serpentor, we got this, which is essentially the same exact mold with a significantly different recoloring, but it has one key feature that I love. That's right. For the first time ever, his helmet comes off, which was a big, big deal. Let me back that up, Jaren, by please Google Serpentor V1 broken helmet. If you can't find it, I'll send you a picture, because I would love for you to see exactly what Serpentor looks like when his helmet is broken. You got it?
He's got no chin.
He looks like his brain is like 4 times larger. I actually have a custom that I made as a kid using an unhelmet. It was like just a broken figure. And I made him like this mutant, and I drew like veins on his head so he had like a super brain or something. It rolls. It's a great figure. But yeah, so that was a big pet peeve of mine back then, is that it's something that's going on. I like to be able for them to take their helmet off. This one could. And I got to say, for its time, pretty good head mold, man. Like, this was the one thing that they were really leagues ahead of at this time. We got a lot of really good vintage style figures. Unlike the retro waves that Hasbro's been putting out, this plastic is actually quite a bit better. It's not original plastic. I think those days are gone forever. But this is, I don't know, in the time, everybody was like, this is not the original. But seeing where we've come from there, this is actually very close to the original. These figures have come back into the limelight in a big way in the last 10 years. I don't feel like they were very... Maybe it was just the availability issue with it, but I don't feel like they were really warmly greeted by a lot of people, and people are now seeing that these are O-rings that belong in most of the collection. There's some real winners in there, and I have to agree. I like this figure a lot. Not better than the original, but very, very good, very close. I wish that if they had done gold, I probably would give it a higher mark. Those are all the O-ring Serpentors that exist. Just those three guys, and they all use the same exact mold, except for that one head change. The modern line is not a lot different. They only put 3 Serpentors out. They put 1 out in 2007, and they put 2 out in 2008, and there's a lot of reuse there as well. So this was the first modern Serpentor that we got, and it's a pretty good start. It is borrowing a little bit from the Devil's Due modernization of his outfit, I think, which is a much more sleek, like 2000s era kind of vibe, like extreme is kind of what it makes it seem like. And modern era figures of this time are not holding up quite as well as they were then, but it's a pretty good looking figure. It's pretty functional. I mean, he's got the cape, it does have a removable helmet, he's got the snakes, and I mean, like, it's okay. It's a good, like, I would consider this to be a modernization of what we've seen in the vintage figures. It was fine, but there's a better one out there. And I'll show you the repaint before I show you him, because in 2008, they put him out again. And basically the only thing they changed was, the color scheme, really. It's his entire mold top to bottom, except no cape. No cape and no gold. So he is actually a worse version, for all intents and purposes.
That's the lieutenant version. They started getting more clones.
This is the
Serpentor
Junior, all aged up, and that one came with an air chariot, and it had like the Steeler and a tank. It was like a whole big box set, which is why it's probably just a basic repaint. Like, it's just they were just needed to throw a figure in there, so it doesn't really do much for me. Certainly not compared to the other one, and even less compared to 2008 Serpentor V6. And unfortunately, this one is one of the more expensive ones. In 2006, they were putting out these battle packs. Sorry, this guy's a little dirty. He's not seen combat in a while. They were putting out these battle packs, and each one came with a DVD, and each one also came with a prop, I guess is what you would call it. So this is obviously the Arise Serpentor Arise miniseries. I don't have it here, but I do have it in my collection. The prop in this one is the skeleton of Montezuma, which is the DNA that Zarana extracts and gets her boot caught, but for some reason just can't take her foot out and get away. And it's a cool little thing. And it also has a piece of the mass device. So if you were trying to build the mass device, you had to buy all 5 of these. Some of these were really hard to get. This one is not one of the hardest ones to get. The one that has Alpine in it is really difficult to track down. But I haven't checked on these in a long time, but I imagine the value of these is still there. Anyway, having said all that, this is definitely the best modern Serpentor. That is the last one. The proportions are better. There's some tooling advancements that have happened in that year. I think he could still use that gold that the very first one has, but the staff, the helmet, he has a hood for the first time in this version. He looks good, man. This is a figure that has held up well over the years. It's a bummer that he's in such a unique set. But yeah, they took that exact same mold. These are all three based on the same body, and this one just looks so much better just with some, just some basic, paint streamline.
Interesting.
So, those are the 6 versions of Serpentor we've had in the vintage and modern line. But obviously, we've got one more Serpentor. It's the classified Serpentor that just came out not that long ago. Jaren, talk me through the highs and lows of this Serpentor.
Okay, well, so I'm going to start with the lows, just to get that out of the way real quick. There are none, and you can't convince me that there's anything wrong with the figure, ever. Aside from, I guess,
should have known. I should have known this is where we were going to go.
the only good Serpentor ever released. No, I'm just kidding. No, so I mean, there were some quality control issues. I think we've talked about on the show. Your Serpentor is unfortunately one of the ones affected by it.
Yes.
So that is one thing that does definitely hurt the figure, but the positives are just, I mean, to me, it's incredible. If you look at the original V1 figure and you scale it up, this is, I think, about as close to perfect as you're going to get. I mean, it like similar molding on the chest with a little snake, like all of that, just very great job. I wish the back was a little more shiny after looking at your original. I wish this was a little more glittery, but it came with 2 different heads. One which was like the more standard, a little bit bigger Cobra. One was a little smaller, but allowed for more head movement. You could kind of free that up. So I keep it with the one with a little bit more head movement, but it is what it is. You had a couple different claws. You had swords. You had a snake. You had, there was a bunch of different accessories that were with it. And then, obviously, you have the air chariot, which is, like you said, one of the coolest. It is at the same time incredibly regal, but also, like, you don't want to mess with it, like, at all.
Yeah.
But my favorite thing about this figure is, and I am a very big fan of big figures. So I've got Sarge here. If you put them side by side, you can tell that there's a pretty big difference. G.I. Joe Classified is a 6-inch scale figure line. That's what it is. This guy is so big that I was looking for size comparisons. He's bigger than him. He's bigger than Gung Ho, Shadow Tracker. I mean, everybody that I could pull out, he's bigger than. So to give you a size comparison, he is as big as a McFarlane 7-inch DC Multiverse. I mean, almost exactly the same size.
That's crazy.
Figure. So he's almost a whole nother scale bigger, which I think is just such a cool idea.
He's a beast.
And it goes back to your original. You said that the original does stand out so much. And there's something imposing about that big hood behind the original figure. And this one, the hood isn't as big, but his sheer size on the shelf when you put him with the rest of them. I don't know if you can see, this corner right here is where I keep Serpentor. And I've got the air chariot in the corner, and I've got him standing there just in the middle on his own looking like a beast. So I am a fan. My little universe of G.I. Joe, he's got his own faction, and he runs it. And, it's a whole new thing. So
Tell
I
me,
love
sorry,
this figure.
we don't talk about Joeverse stuff anywhere near as much as I'd like to. Can you elaborate on how Serpentor operates in your world? You've got a whole other thing going.
Well, obviously,
and it's great. I love it.
he doesn't have any Techno Vipers because there's only one Techno Viper. That's the first the key.
And I guess if he wants somebody to drive a ferret, he has to go call the one ferret female driver.
We had some great ferret driver recommendations.
We'll get to those on our next regular episode, but yes, we have some great nominees.
So in my Joe universe, and something that I have been doing recently is basically Python Patrol figures all go straight to Serpentor. I mean, it is like a splinter group within Cobra. So you see very similar designs. I mean, they were trained the same way. They have the same gear, but they've just given it their own little flavor. So maybe you change it to, if it doesn't say Python Patrol, you name them the Coil or whatever. I have kind of given Shadow Tracker as like one of his like more lieutenants. just because he doesn't, Shadow Tracker's, he's just kind of out there. And then that way it gives the Dreadnoks another person to be hired by, or he can reach out to Mars Industry. But so in my universe, he's like he's more of like a shadowy leader. Like he doesn't, they definitely don't get in as many direct conflicts with the G.I. Joes. He's just trying to play the long game, going for the more scheming and things like that. But I like him enough, but I also understand that it's hard to have him and him not be in control. So if I want him to be alive, he kind of has to do something. So that's where he came along with the lines of, okay, well, let's make all these Python Patrol figures, all of these different versions of characters that are just repaints, but it gives them even more meaning than just being a sub-team. They're like a whole new group.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I love it. I would love to hear you, the listeners. How do you use Serpentor? Are you using Serpentor? I really want to hear from people that are doing like Jaren and I do, where Serpentor is kind of consistently in the universe. He's not just dead and back and dead and back, because we've seen that time and time again, and it's such a basic formula. You see him and you go, well, Cobra Commander's probably going to kill him in like 5 issues, because there's just nobody can kind of find a static way to keep him around, be a threat, and be entertaining at the same time. So yeah, if you're using Serpentor, thoughts on Serpentor, please leave comments, email us. I enjoy talking about him. We've spent so much time and we have more to go that I'm just like, I'm soaking it all in right now. I want to give a shout out to all the great collaborators that are participating in Cobra Convergence 8 this year. And of course, I want to give a special thanks to Hooded Cobra Commander for the invite, for allowing us to be, a participant. If you've enjoyed this conversation on Serpentor, please go to Barking Fridge on YouTube. I'll put the link in our description. He did an awesome animated sequence of My Dinner with Serpentor, which is something that I had done in my research. It's like a little 4 or 5 page story from the G.I. Joe Yearbook number 3. It's great. It blew me away. They've got original voice acting. They've animated scenes. As somebody that kind of does that, I'm stunned at how extremely well done it is. So please check that out. G.I. Joeberg just did a huge collaborative play motion event that it rules. It's got a bunch of like deep cut characters in it. Great storytelling all around. I highly recommend you check that out. And also, I was just on Order of Battle last week with Joel. We were talking about the Plague, which is a 7-trooper group from the Devil's Due Image era, where they're like an elite force of these, like the best of, the best Sand Viper, the best Techno Viper, the best whatever, and they made a little team. It was a great conversation. Thanks to Joel for having me on for that. I really enjoyed. It's another deep cut, and that's right up my alley. I love my deep cut Joes and Cobras. We'll be back in 2 short weeks, and we'll be talking about Kentuckiana, because Kentuckiana is this weekend for us, and we're so excited. We'll get to see our buddies at Podcast from the Pit. We'll get to see our buddies for Order of Battle. We'll get to see, I know every vendor there by name that's worth their salt. It's just like a group of the best fans, the best sellers, having a good time. We all go out to eat together. We all hang out and drink. We're playing games. We're doing room deals. It's one of the only social interactions I put on my calendar. I am so excited for it.
Hey, and there's Mr. Gaddy's Friday, the day of, and Greg is very excited. He's ready to eat with everyone.
Do not eat at a Mr. Gaddy's. That's the end of the statement. Don't do it anywhere. If you are even close to my age, that's suicide, man. Like, you're just asking for a bad time. We will not be eating there. I will not be eating there because I have a lot of stuff to do this weekend, and I don't want to spend it on the turlet. So, if you're going to be at Kentuckiana, hit us up. Look for us. We'll be out big time. If you're not going to be at Kentuckiana, don't worry, buddy. I'm going in full production mode. I'll film everything that I can get my eyes on, so you guys will know what it was like to have been there yourself. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can reach us at Anything Joe's Pod. That's Jaren on Instagram, me on Twitter, or anythingjoespod@gmail.com. We'll get probably both of us because we check up pretty regularly. Thanks so much for watching, and we look forward to talking to you again in just 2 short weeks, or anything's available for discussion here on Anything Joe's.
Examining the ranks from the commander to Destro, diving deep into the figures, modern and retro, from Crimson Guards to Vipers, their schemes will decode on this special episode. The Cobra secrets flowed. Cobra Convergence, it's been a ride, unmasking villains, no secrets left to hide. From Serpentor's birth to Zartan's best disguise, in the world of G.I. Joe, Cobra never dies. As we close this chapter with Cobra on our mind, remember G.I. Joe is always right behind. Heroes in the shadows, keeping villains at bay, until we meet again every other Wednesday.